What's up everybody, welcome back. So after the last video where we made the spawners for the pickups, we only really have one thing left to do for the equipment that we added, and that's making sure that it works the same way as our weapons. So if we pick up a new type of equipment in the level, it will be saved to our equipment inventory, and then we can select it in the loadout menu to start the level with. So that's what we're gonna do today. If you like the series, please consider leaving a like, and if you want to get the project files, you can become a member of the YouTube channel or a Patreon, and then you will get access to premium channels in the Discord and also a download for the project. So let's start today's video. So first of all, we want to make sure we're able to save the equipment array to our saved data. So we're going to go to the saved data folder and change the player profile structure. So we're changing a struct, make sure everything is saved, and we're opening the structure. So in here, we're going to add another names array. So let's add a variable, and that's our equipment inventory. So turn it into an array of names. And now we only want to save the structure and nothing else. So save it in the top left, and then we're going to close the project and don't save anything else. And reopen the project to make sure that nothing is broken. So I'll be back in a sec. So we're back up and running. Now, as I mentioned, we want to make it work the same way as our weapon inventory. So we can pretty much copy a lot of that stuff. So what we're going to do, the first thing, go to the framework folder and open our shooter PlayerController. And in here we have a function called save picked up weapon. So we're going to duplicate this function and call this save picked up equipment. So in here we want to make a small change. We want to get the new equipment inventory array instead of the weapon inventory array, and we're going to store that in the local inventory. So simply move over the pin for the player profile structure. And then we also want to make sure that over here for the set members in player profile, we actually write it to the correct array. So right now we have the weapon inventory hooked up, and we want to hook it up to the equipment inventory. So enable that pin and hook it up over here. So that should pretty much be everything we need to change in here. So we can call this function to save the current equipment array for the player. Now we want to make a few things in the event graph. So let's open up our event graph in here. And in here we actually have an event that will replicate the saving to the owning client because it's called from the server. So we can look for a picked up weapon, and we have the client save picked up a weapon event. So we want to make the same event, but this time for the equipment array. So we're going to make a custom event, call this client save picked up equipment. So this event needs to be replicated to the owning client. So run on owning client, and then we can call save picked up equipment. So simply plug it in and pass on the row name. So to make it a little bit more or less confusing, we can call this the equipment row name and change the name in here as well. There we go. So now we can call this replicated event from the server to make sure that the client saves it to the local save game. So that's good to go as well. We also want to change a little bit in here. So let me see if we go to the save picked up weapon function for now. So in here, because this runs on the local character, we need to determine if that local character is a client or the server. And if it's a client, we need to make sure that the server replicates the new player profile to the player controllers. But if we look at this event over here, it turns out we actually added some stuff behind it. So it doesn't really break anything, but we don't really need to execute any of this stuff. We only want to set the player profile. So what we're going to do in here for the event graph, I'm going to rename this event from server set player profile to server finish load. So this loads the save game and all of that stuff, so load profile. So that's why I'm calling this one server finish load. And then I'm going to create a new custom event and call this one server set profile. And make sure that this is set to run on server. And for this one, we're only going to set the player profile like we should and pass it on like this. So with this new custom event in place, we want to go back to the save picked up weapon function and replace this node. So now we want to call our server set profile and move the pins over. And do the same thing for the new function that we created for the equipment. So in here again, get rid of this call and call server set profile and move the pins over. So we can get rid of this one. So we are calling the finish load over here. So that's why we still need it, and we need 2 versions of it. So that should be good to go. And what we want to do now is go into the pickup equipment to make sure we actually call this new stuff. So let's minimize this one and go to the gameplay loot folder and open our pickup equipment. So for completion's sake, let's rename this boolean to save picked up equipment. And we want to go into the pickup function all the way to the end. So right before the return node, and we're going to ignore this upper branch. So this upper branch is for when the item is not picked up. So in that case, we don't need to save anything. And we only want to hook up these 2 lower branches that come from the main branch if the pickup is actually added. So what we're going to do in here is simply add a branch and check if we want to save the picked up weapon or not. So that's simply a setting on the pickup. So now move over the execution pins. And if that's true, then we can get our player character. And from the player character, we can get the shooter player controller. And from there, we can simply call our client save picked up equipment function. So this is only for the true pin. And in this case, we can simply plug in our equipment row name to add. So that's the equipment that we want to save to the inventory. And then make sure that we hook both of them back up to the return node, so everything is connected again. There we go. So that's all we really need to change inside of the pickup. And now technically the inventory for the equipment will save, and if we pick up a new equipment item where we have this boolean enabled in the level, that will be stored to our equipment inventory. There's one downside: we cannot really test it right now because we don't have it added to the widgets, so that's what we're gonna do next. So let's go to the widgets folder and we want to open up our loadout menu. So we need a button for the equipment. So in the designer, we're simply going to duplicate our button for slot number 2. And this is going to be the button for slot number 3. So in the loadout, slot number 3 will always be our equipment slot. So now for the text, we can simply change it over here. Set it to equipment. Nope. And we want to change the border size a little bit. And I'm going to shrink down the spacer a little bit as well. So the spacing is a little bit better. Something like that should do. So we have a new button in place and we want to make sure that's actually working. So let's go to event graph. And the first thing we want to do is add the button to our array of buttons. So if we go to the event graph and then to event construct, over here we're creating an array, all of the weapon slot buttons. So we need to make sure that we have our new slot button added here as well. So add an array item and look for button slot number 3 and plug it in over here. So that should be good to go. And now we need to make the actual button work. So this may look kind of complicated if you're not really sure how to tackle this, but what I did is simply follow the execution from when the button is pressed and then change things along the line. So you can make it a little bit easier for yourself by simply following the execution and change everything that you come across that needs to be changed in a simple way. Sounds easier than it is probably, but I found that to be working pretty good. So what we want to do is add a new onClicked event for our button slot number 3. So let's add the onClicked event and let's add it to the rest over here. So we want to call this function, obviously, slot button clicked, but I'm going to make a slight change in here to how this works, and I'm going to explain why I did that a little bit later. So for the slot button clicked, we want to add an input, and that's going to be the isEquipment slot. So that's a boolean, and then I want to do the same thing for the create all inventory buttons function. So also select that function and add one input, and that's going to be the isEquipment slot. And then inside of the slot button clicked function, we simply want to pass on this boolean from the input over here to the call over here. So simply connect them up. And now if we go back to the event graph over here, if we click button slot number 3, we want to enable the boolean. So this is an equipment slot, and we're going to set the slot index to slot number 3. And the weapon type, we can ignore that because we're using the boolean. And then we can grab this and simply plug it into the update weapon info nodes. So that will update the weapon info cards with the compare values and things like that. And what we don't need to do is update the loadout character if we are changing our equipment slot. So we're going to add a branch in here and simply check our active slot index. So if this is not equal to slot number 3, then we're going to update the loadout character as well. So plug it in. And if this is true, update the loadout character. If this is an equipment slot, then we're going to skip that. So that's the setup over here. Let me dive in my notes quickly to keep the correct order. Slot button clicked, then I will do the event graph. So we added that stuff. So now we want to go to the create all inventory buttons. So we clicked the slot button over here. This event is called and it will pass on the new boolean to the create all inventory buttons, and that will populate this scroll box with all of the available inventory items. So inside of this function, we're going to use this new boolean that we created. So let me grab my example project quickly. So we want to change this array, the player inventory, because if this is an equipment selection, then we want to use the equipment inventory. So make sure you set the player loadout first. Then we're going to add a branch, plug it in over here, and check if this is an equipment slot. So if it's false, we're going to load the player inventory from the weapon inventory from the profile structure, and otherwise we're going to grab the equipment inventory from the profile structure, hook up both of them back to the for each loop, and then make sure you plug in the local variable for the player inventory in here, so it loops through the correct inventory. And now we're gonna go to the main reason why we added the boolean. So over here we're simply checking if the weapon type that we're creating the button for is equal to the weapon type that we set in the slot over here. And right now we only have throwable items for an equipment, but we might end up with something like a usable health pack that we can carry with us, for example. So then the weapon types won't necessarily match. So what I want to do is simply create a switch, and we're able to add different weapon types for equipment slot. So that's pretty much what we're doing. So if we're looping through this array of player inventory and we can't find anything in the weapon info table, that means we are using an equipment info table. So we're going to drag off the row not found pin and get a table row again. And this time we want to get it from our equipment info table. So plug in the array element from the for each loop And if we have this equipment info table, we can break the out row. And inside here, we have the weapon type as well. So we can grab the weapon type from the structure. And then we're gonna grab a branch. So grab a branch, plug it into the row found pin. And we want to know if we are dealing with an equipment slot. So let's make sure. So we kind of knew it from here, but we're going to double check by using the input from the function. And if that's true, then we're going to switch on the weapon type enum from the structure. So switch on weapon type. So this goes into the true pin. And right now we only have throwables. So for a throwable, we're going to connect it up to the create weapon button widget. So for throwables, we're going to create buttons, and for primary and secondary weapons, we're going to skip them. So that should be good. And now we also want to make sure that we grab this branch over here. So from the weapon info table, if the row is found, then first we're going to check if this is an equipment slot or not. And if that's false, then we're going to go back to the branch that checks the weapon type with the weapon type set on the slot button. So make sure that you route this node through the equipment check as well. So that will be good to go, and now it will create the correct widgets. I don't think we need to do anything else in here, so it's checking if the current equipment is assigned in the loadout and then enables or disables the button, so that's good to go. So this function should be good. The next thing we want to do, so we click the button, we made sure this function is updated and the create all inventory buttons that's called from here is also updated. So then it's going to call our update weapon info, and we need to change that next. So let's open this one up, and that's a pretty big function, but all this does is populate the info cards over here with the correct information. So that's not too bad. We want to go to the get table row node, and we can use the same technique that we just did. So if the row is not found, then we're going to look in the equipment info table, because then it's probably an equipment item. So I'm hiding the unconnected pins over here to make it a little bit less messy. Then from the row not found, I'm going to get a table row again. This time grab the equipment info table and grab the weapon row name, simply copy and paste it and plug it in over here. So then we can break the out row, and we can pretty much copy and paste all of this stuff over here. So start with the setter for the local name and then copy everything up to the end for the local icon. Copy it and paste it down here. And we do want to make a few changes in here. So first of all, let's hook it up to the row found pin. So the local name is the display name. We can simply hook that over. The local class is going to be our equipment type. So in this case, that's a name variable, and we can simply convert it like this. And then we have our fire rate. So we're not actually using fire rate for equipment, so we can get rid of this part that sets the fire rate. And we're also we're using damage, but we don't need to call the get weapon damage function because we don't need to calculate it. We can simply get it from the data table, so get rid of this as well. And then we have two branches that check for the equipped weapon, so get rid of one of them and hook the other one up. So we're setting the text for the damage after we set the class, and make sure that we grab the damage over here from the throwable damage in the structure. The next thing we're doing over here is calculating the DPS, but for equipment, again, we're not using DPS, so we can get rid of this part and then simply only hook up the icon. No. So we're going to hook up both of the branches in here and grab the icon from the data table like so. Now, because we're not setting the fire rate and the DPS, we want to make sure that we hide those text variables on the widget. So we're going to grab our weapon DPS comparison and selected variables. So weapon DPS comparison, the text, and weapon DPS selected over here. And also grab the fire rate comparison and the fire rate selected. And we want to set the visibility for those. So because this is a branch that only fires for equipment, we can simply hide them and make sure that we hook up all 4 of them. So that's good to go. You could obviously choose to enter a different statistic in here. So for example, enter the damage radius and then simply change the text for these nodes and grab the damage radius from the structure. So you can change it up a little bit if you like to. I chose to go the easy route in this case. So because we hide everything in here, we want to copy this and go to the upper branch. So after we set the icon for the weapon, we can make sure that we set these to visible if we are using the weapon branch. So in here, change it to visible and make sure you have all 4 of them hooked up again. Now we want to hook up this lower branch over here to the set text nodes. So to the same node as where the weapon branch goes, and we're simply setting all of the text stuff. So now everything will appear correctly in the widget for equipment as well. So we can compile and save this one, and that function is done. So we have a little bit left to do in the event graph, I think. So let me quickly check over here. We have one thing left to do, and that's if we go down into the event graph, if we click on our equip button. So if we actually assign something from our loadout to our, from the inventory to the loadout, then we want to make sure that at the end we only update the loadout character if this is not an equipment slot. So again, if the for each loop completed, at the end we're calling update loadout character, and we're only going to do that if our active slot index is not equal to 3. So let's do a not equal to, and number 3 is our equipment slot, and then hook it up like this. So that should be pretty much all we need to do in the loadout menu, and now it will show the correct loadout buttons, and we should be able to assign them. If we change something inside of the actual button, so that's what we're going to do next. We're going to minimize this, and we're going to open up our button weapon inventory. So this button will be put inside of the scroll box over here, and that's the button that we can press to assign it to the selected weapon slot. And then if we click equip, we're actually assigning it to the player loadout. So inside here, we want to go to the graph, and the main thing we want to do is make sure that it actually displays the correct stuff. So right now we're looking in the weapon info table, and if we're looking for equipment, we can't find anything, so we won't display anything in here. So let's clean this up a little bit first and get rid of the weird kink in here. So we're using the async load asset to set the brush from texture, but because this is a border, we cannot use a set brush from soft texture. So we need to load it with an async asset load node. So we need to keep that in there. We cannot do optimization, but that's a little side note. So if this row is not found, we're gonna get another table row. And this time we want to get it from the equipment info table again. So make sure that we grab the weapon row name and plug it in here as well. And then we can break the equipment info structure. So we can make sure that we set the correct stuff. And we can pretty much copy and paste it again. So let's just copy and paste everything and get rid of the things we don't need. So copy, paste it down here. Plug it into the row found pin. So first we're gonna load the HUD icon and set it. So that's good to go. We can keep that. the weapon name, we can simply plug in our display name. And then we want to grab the weapon type, and that's the enum. So we also have that inside of the data table in here, weapon type, simply hook it up. The weapon class, we're going to use our equipment type, so the name variable, and it will be converted for us. Simply hook it up. Now we are dealing with the fire rate and the DPS, and we don't really need that. So for the equipment, we can delete the fire rate variable, and then we don't need to set the text in here, so we can delete that as well. We don't need to get weapon damage, and we don't need to store it because we don't need to calculate the DPS, so we can get rid of that as well. Keep the setter for the text weapon damage, and then get rid of the set text node for the DPS again. So we can move this over. So after the weapon class, we're setting the text weapon damage, and we can get that from the data table. Simply plug in the throwable damage. And then at the end, we want to make sure that we set the visibility for the two text nodes that we're not using to hidden. So we have the fire rate and the DPS, and we're going to set the visibility. Plug it in over here. Make sure you connect both of them and then set them to hidden. So then we want to copy this part and move it to the end of the upper branch, and make sure for the upper branch they are visible again. And that should be good to go. And in here, if we are clicking this button, we are simply calling the update weapon info function, and we already changed that one. So clicking the button should still work. Doesn't matter if it's equipment or an actual weapon. So that should pretty much be everything except for a small thing inside of the game instance. So let's go to our framework folder and open the shooter game instance. So in here for the event graph, we have an event that we're calling if we're creating a new profile. And we want to make sure that in here, we are also adding the new loadout slot. So over here, weapon loadout, we want to add a third slot, and you can either make it empty, or by default, I'm going to assign the grenade normal. So if I create a new character, then by default, it will have the normal grenade inside of the weapon loadout. And because of that, we also need to make sure that we add it to the actual inventory array. So I'm going to make an array with one entry, and that's the grenade normal. So add them to the weapon loadout, the third slot, and add them to the equipment inventory. And that's good to go. Now the last thing we want to do is go inside of our hero base character and make sure that we actually load it if we start the level. So let's go to hero base. And in here we want to go to the setup weapon inventory function. And we can simply change this up a little bit. So right now, let's see. So we're assigning the loadout over here, and these are all weapons. So we're stopping at slot index 2. If it's 3, it will break the loop and don't add anything to it. So index 3 will not exist on our character yet. So right now, after that, we're increasing the inventory size, but that doesn't really have to do anything with the equipment inventory. So this is the weapon inventory. And now we're just assigning the grenade normal to slot number 3 in here. So what we can do instead is simply grab the third slot from our save game. So we're going to go to the player profile structure in here, drag off the loadout, and we're going to get a copy. And then get a copy of slot number 3. And that's the thing that we're going to hook up over here to the weapon loadout set array element. So we're setting that to the third slot in our loadout. And then we also want to hook that up to our add item to inventory. So we have it inside of the inventory in slot number 0, and it's assigned to our loadout by default, and it's loading that from the actual player profile. So if we change it in the menu, this will change as well. Now there is one thing left over here. Let me see. So we want to make sure that our equipment inventory size that we set in here will be expanded with empty slots if needed. So that's what we're doing in here. We can grab the equipment inventory and check the current length to make this a little bit more dynamic. And then if the length, if our equipment inventory size, so we want to grab that from the variables, if that's greater than the current length of the array, then we want to actually execute this for each loop and add empty slots to the equipment inventory. So hook it up over here, check it. If this is true, we're going to run the for loop and we're going to start at the current equipment inventory length as the first index. And if this is false, we can simply go to the return node. We don't need to add any slots to our equipment inventory. Okay, so this should work. So let's run over this. This is the last branch in case that wasn't really clear. So from the for loop for the weapon inventory where we add the empty slots, and we're also having the same branch over here where we're checking the length. That's where we're hooking up the weapon loadout. We're getting it from the player profile, add it to the equipment loadout, etc, etc. So this is how it should look. There we go. Okay, so let's compile and save. I'm gonna run a game and I'll be back in a sec so we can test it. But before I'm running a game, we need to make sure that in the level we actually have the booleans enabled that will save the equipment. So let's make sure that we open up the level where we have the pickups and go to the detail panel for the pickups. So we have the random pickup spawners, and that's the main thing where we want to change it probably. So I don't have any of the save picked up item booleans enabled. And if you don't have these enabled, the item will not be saved to the inventory. So make sure you enable them over here if you want this to actually save and for the player to be able to select in the loadout menu for the next game. And then the same thing goes for the pickup weapon. So in here we also have the save picked up weapon boolean, and for the equipment we also have it. So you might want to enable it for all of the pickups if you want to test this easily. Okay, so everything is enabled in the level. Let's save that. And now I can actually run a game and try and test it. So the game is running. Now keep in mind we changed our player profile structure. So if we're going to load one of the old profiles, then the equipment inventory on that player profile will not have the default grenade normal setup. So it will be kind of janky. So what you want to do if you want to test this properly is simply reset a profile or create a new one. So let's do that. And now if we go to the solo game, for example, we can go to our weapon selection. And if we select the equipment slot, then by default we have our normal grenade in here. We could unequip it if we like to, and then it's selectable in here again, and we can equip it again. So that part is working. Now let's make sure that if we pick something up in game, it actually saves and we're able to use it later. So if I pick up an ice grenade here, for example, then I will have both of them in my inventory. And right now, if I will go back to the main menu and start a new game, then I should be able to select it in here as well. So right now I can change out my normal grenade for my ice grenade. And I should spawn with the ice grenade if I start the level. And that actually seems to be working. So that's good to go. And right now I only have the ice grenade in my current inventory. So that's working as well. So that is good to go. And I can tell you that it's working in multiplayer as well. So it will save for each client separately and things like that. So that should all work. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please consider leaving a like, and I'll be back soon for more. Talk to you later, guys. Bye bye.